Hello there, and welcome to the weekly online worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation Santa Rosa, which is a progressive and inclusive spiritual community in downtown Santa Rosa, California, dedicated to celebrating life, empowering people, caring for one another, and helping to build a better world. And though we are not gathered in person these days, we are definitely still gathered together as a community of the heart and soul. I'm glad you've found us. Today's service was crafted by our own Joe Gabaeff, longtime member of this community who's now training for the Unitarian Universalist ministry at the Star King School for the Ministry. And it features a reflection from Stephanie Reed and an original song from Andy Levine and Robert Howseman, song by the choir, music from Roger Corman, and more. Thank you to all of you folks for helping create today's experience. We all hope it will be of use to you and inspiring to you. If you haven't visited our website or in particular our Facebook page lately, please do so. If you follow us on Facebook, that's probably the best way to stay in tune with upcoming events and activities here at the congregation. On our website, you can make a donation if you are so called, and we sure appreciate it. We're still serving our Saturday breakfast every week and taking care of our staff, so your contributions are greatly appreciated. If you are feeling lonely, there's room in our Soul Matters discussion groups, which are meeting online, and most of our neighborhood groups are up and running. If yours isn't and you'd like to make it happen, get in touch with me, get in touch with the office. We want to have as many folks connecting out there as possible. Coming up this Wednesday and the following Wednesday are the last two sessions of the Getting to Know You orientation class. It's a 3-part series. Don't worry if you missed the first one. Love to have you for the next. Look at the Facebook page for information there. We meet at 7 o'clock. And the next class on the sources is coming up on July 18th at 10 o'clock in the morning, where we'll look at prophetic words and deeds of people who call us to confront powers and structures of evil with the transforming power of love. The transforming power of love. And keep your eyes open to the Facebook page for the next scheduling of our racial justice discussion series, which will occur in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Keep on praying and singing and calling each other. Stay safe. Wear your mask. Speaking of masks, hundreds of masks have been sewn by this congregation for frontline workers and people who might not have ready access to them. It's been a wonderful activity of the community over the last few months. And before we proceed with our service, a bow of thanks to all you sewers. We begin our service with the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of our UU faith. The offset circles represent the merged Unitarian and Universalist traditions. The cup is an ancient symbol representing the bounty and blessings of nature, that giving, sharing, birthing quality of our lives. And the flame is the light of truth, the power of love, and the divine spark within every person. And I'll invite you to read with me our opening words. It's number 416 in the hymnal. They'll appear on your screen from Robert French Levin's. Holy and beautiful the custom which brings us together in the presence of the Most High, to face our ideals, to remember our loved ones in absence, to give thanks, to make confession, to offer forgiveness, to be enlightened, and to be strengthened. Through this quiet hour breathes the worship of ages, the cathedral music of history. 3 unseen guests attend: faith, hope, and love. Let all our hearts prepare them place.
This is a poem titled Gently Hovering. I hadn't taken the trash out yet in the pandemic. I noticed the first fly and didn't think much of how many were already there if this small one hovered gently. By night, there were 10, hovering gently. I took the trash out, and when I came back, there were 50, perched gently in the kitchen, silently harming no one. The next morning, friends all over my one bedroom, gently hovering grief.
each person is worthwhile. 2, be kind in all you do. 3, let's help each other grow. 4, keep searching for the true. 5, each person has a say. 6, work for a peaceful world. 7, the web of life's the way that will bring us back to you.
Good morning. I'm Jen Freese, your Director of Religious Education, and Owen and I are here with
the Wonder Box.
Do you want to open it today?
Yeah.
All right.
It's your wedding ring.
Oh, it is. You got a little dirt on it, I see. This makes me think of a story. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah.
All right. So, do you remember what happened to my ring when our house burned down?
Yeah.
What happened?
You left the ring in the kitchen.
I left the ring in the kitchen. I had taken it off the night before because I was making meatballs. And I left it on the kitchen counter. And then when we evacuated, we left the ring and everything else. And so afterwards, how was I feeling?
Really sad.
Really sad. And I was really sad that I lost my ring because it was so special to me. And Daddy and I went back by ourselves to the site where the house was. And there was all the burned down house. And it was a big mess. And it smelled really bad. And we started digging in the place where the kitchen was. And we were digging for about maybe like 10 minutes, not very long. And I thought it would be so easy, like I could just get to that spot. But you know what happened? I started to feel so sick when I was there. It was like my body was so sad and so upset. And it was also so sick from all of the smell of everything that I felt so sick to my stomach, and I actually started to faint. And Daddy had to get me out of there as fast as he could. And so he helped me, and we went to a friend's house nearby, and I had to lay down. And I was so disappointed in myself because my grief was so strong that I couldn't go back and find my ring. So then we had some friends who heard about it and knew that it was lost there. And they were friends from
church.
From the congregation. Yeah. Do you remember who it was?
Oliver's mom and Melissa and Daddy.
So Daddy went, and Melissa and Emily and Veronica, and they all went to the site where the house was, and they started digging. And they kept saying, okay, we're just a little bit longer and we're going to find it. And then they kept digging, and then they kept digging, and they kept going. And do you know how many hours they were there? They were there for I want to say 4 hours, maybe even more. And they were digging and digging, and it was getting dark, and they were like, oh, we should probably let go, but maybe we'll just go a few more minutes, because right before we're about to leave, I know we're going to just find it. Finally, they were on the phone with me, and I said, it's okay, guys. Let's just let it go. It's getting dark. And all of a sudden, I heard Melissa shout over the phone in the background, I found it! And Daddy went, wait, what? And they all started screaming. And they had all found, and that was it. Melissa found my ring.
How?
And she just found it. She kept digging as deep as she could go in the spot of the kitchen, and it was all the way down by the foundation of the house, the cement, so several feet deep. And they sifted through all of that. And the interesting thing was, my grief was so sad before when I was all by myself, but when our friends came together and they helped us, they hadn't lost their houses, but they felt what I was feeling. I knew they did. And it made me feel so much more healed that they came together and they were with Daddy in that moment. Does that make sense? So this story kind of reminds me that when we lose things, whether it's a house or a person, or we're feeling sad because of things happening in our country, coming together makes us a lot stronger and helps us heal more than when we try to do it ourselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you can remember that when you have some loss too? Yeah? Okay. Thanks, Owen. All right, we're going to go ahead and do our UU affirmation. Would you like to tell everyone who we are? All right, can you sit up? Here we go. We are Unitarian Universalists, people of the open mind, the loving hearts, and the helping hands.
Hello, I'm Bruce Hope, one of your lay chaplains. Milestones are where we share our joys and sorrows with the congregation. Births and birthdays, anniversaries and graduations, and other joyous occasions, as well as more tender events that we hold close to our hearts, such as deaths, illnesses, injuries, and difficult transitions. You're invited to light a candle to remember those you are holding near to your hearts. I'll light one here, and if you'd like, pause the video to light your own candle. These are the milestones we share online this week. Congratulations to Barbara Leahy and Bud Willis, who wrote, "We're happy to announce that we married on Sunday, June 28th. Rev Chris officiated in our backyard. It was beautiful. Thanks to the many that have reached out to us, this is truly the congregation that keeps on giving." From Mary Wolf, "Saturday is my birthday, born on July 4th. This is mixed with sadness for the current political climate and the ongoing struggle with the coronavirus." Richard Sengas shared that he and Tina just celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary this week, that he celebrated his 60th birthday this past week. He wrote, "Even in these strange times, we still mark good times." Elizabeth Craven said, "Last week, while backpacking in Yosemite, Brian and I celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary. It was a lovely way to celebrate 24 years of hiking, camping, generally loving the outdoors and one another. Cheers to many more." From the Freese family, happy birthday to Sean Freese, who turned 41 tomorrow on Monday, and to Owen Freese, who will turn 9 years old this Saturday. Roger De Beers wrote, "I will have my left eye, droopy lower eyelid, also known as cicatricial ectopian surgery, Thursday, July 9th, at 8 a.m. Of course, I have to have the COVID-19 test before the procedure on Monday the 6th, and then it's 2 weeks with an eye patch. In the spirit of our world gone mad, let's have a George Carlin binge party." And Kaylee Traylor wrote, "Thanks to all the Soul Matters facilitators who gave their time and enthusiasm in this past year and are continuing to do so. A short shout out to Jan Ogren, who jumped in to help coordinate the program, even with her busy schedule, 10 groups and 100 participants. If you have something to share, please send it to the lay chaplains at uusantarosa.org. Let us know if you want it included here in the online service or just in the weekly compilation and the Milestones book. If you have a private concern, we'd love to talk with you. Your lay chaplains are Paula Hammett, Lucia Milburn, Barbara Kezar, Bruce Hope, Tama Merle, Mary Little Lee, and Al Liner. We give thanks for the sharing of these milestones, for how they remind us of our shared humanity and our common fate, and inspire our compassion and care. May all our joys be magnified as we delight together in the good news. May all our sorrows be eased as we delight, as we carry them together in our community. May You who searching for courage and comfort, faith and hope, find what we seek. May all people grow in wisdom, compassion, and love, that the whole world might live with justice and in peace. Be safe and be well.
Before we move into a time of meditation, let us share our grief. Our grief, when carried alone, can be opaque. But when we share our grief in a safe container, that container can transform that grief. I gathered strands of grief from this congregation, and for each one spoken, I will place that grief into our communal container. I grieve the loss of my partner of 26 years who died in March. I miss my dad's wry sense of humor and his big bear hugs. I grieve the gradual loss of acuity as I grow older. I feel raw from the loss of a very close friend to breast cancer just 2 days ago. I grieve the loss of contact with my friends and patients. I grieve the loss of biodiversity on the planet. My heart is completely shattered. I grieve the loss of seeing my friends and going to school. I grieve my mother's death, mixed with gratitude that she is no longer suffering. I grieve the loss of visiting my parents and siblings in San Diego and the loss of family reunions. We grieve the loss of our majestic dog, Maya, our companion for the last 16 years. I miss meeting in person. I grieve the loss of life from the pandemic. So you can see that when we share our grief in a safe container, it transforms from opaque and thick to something we can at least begin to see our way through.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind and rise in the sea. Move in the land, giving life the shape of justice. Roots folding close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
When I was 23, my 18-year-old brother drowned in a rafting accident on an Easter Sunday. I was very close to him and chose to honor his death with what I call good grief. To me, good grief is about finding the skillful means and the loving support needed to heal well and move past grief. After my brother's death, loved ones gathered round to give us that loving support. I also had the good fortune to find a class titled Death and Dying based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's writings. From her, I learned about the stages of grief: shock and denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. I learned that grief has its own timetable and that it takes time to get to a place of acceptance, sometimes years. It turned out that learning to grieve my brother's death well in turn paved the way for me to grieve my son's death well 21 years later. It was on a winter day in 1995 that our 15-year-old son, who was just coming out gay unbeknownst to us, took a bus from Petaluma High School to the Golden Gate Bridge. According to witnesses, he leapt over the rail without fear or hesitation, with his black trench coat streaming behind him. It's a haunting image. His body was never found, and he left no note. With no body, it fell upon us to declare him dead. We had a service for him at the Pengrove Women's Clubhouse, which was filled to capacity with family, friends, the gay community, and many from the community at large. Given the attendance, we knew we were not alone. It remains a powerful image looking out over all those faces as I spoke. Following that service, though, was when our journey through grief as his parents truly began in earnest. We reached out to the Goldman Institute in San Francisco for help. They offered a course and support group for survivors of suicide. We learned how everyone grieves differently, and our commitment as a couple was to not let our son's suicide ruin our marriage. We would never blame one another and would fully support each other in our separate journeys through grief. My husband needed time alone outside. I became active in the gay youth movement. I also began walking miles every day as a way to process the loss. I felt called upon during those walks to make this world a better place by picking up trash, which I do to this day in the name of my son. Lastly, on occasion, I close my eyes and envision my son jumping off the bridge. In this vision, he lands on an enormous lotus flower that is floating on the bay. The lotus flower then gently lifts him to the great beyond and a better life. It is my great hope that all those suffering and in pain find their way to a place of peace, beauty, and acceptance.
Hi, it's Andy Levine here. In early 2013, my friend and congregational member David Lerner died of a massive heart attack at 55. When I heard about it, I felt devastated. I sat down and wrote down some words, and I shared them with Robert Howseman. We both cried, and he put music to my words as well as fleshing out the lyrics. Robert had lost his dear friend Cindy 3 years earlier, and my words really touched him. This is how Gone Too Soon came to be. We all have lost people that we thought were gone too soon, and this song is for you all.
I don't know what to do with this loss. Some hearts are harder to lose. Can't get my head around you're not being round. Some songs play out their tune. Yours ended too soon. Gone too soon. Gone too soon. Too soon. Too soon. No more bear hugs from you with that smile. No more chatting for a while. Music will never die. I didn't get to say goodbye like a smile from the man in the moon. Your smile left us too soon. Gone too soon. Too soon, too soon. My tapestry's grown long with bright and faded colors. Some of its finest threads were you. Can't mend the holes you leave. No one else could match that weave. Don't even think that I still have the loom. Your colors ran out too soon. Gone too soon. Gone too soon. Too soon. Too soon. When we gather, a voice will be missing. Laughing or sharing a song. Your chair is here in the unbroken circle, and your friends still carry the tune. But your harmony left it too soon. Gone too soon. Gone too soon. Gone too soon. Gone too soon. You left us too soon. You left us too soon.
The gift of grief. 3 years ago, I would have no clue what to say about this topic. It wasn't that I had never felt sad about loss. I just had never really grieved, really gone into that sadness and gone through it. And when I did, I learned that grief is a communal emotion. That when we grieve together, we bond. I always thought that it was all about love when it came to connection, that love would be the thing that connected us all, and it does. But I didn't know that we can connect over the loss of love as well. Grief and love are two sides of the same connective coin. If you love, you will grieve. If you love, you will grieve. And similar to one of the gifts of love, one of the gifts of grief is that it is connective. Might help to share a bit of my own journey into grief. Turns out the doorway for my grief was anger. And I grew up in such a way where anger was not acceptable. I had a notion that anger is a fundamentally disconnective emotion, and as a result of that, it had no place in the lexicon of my living. A few years ago, I was attending a men's spiritual retreat, and there was an opportunity to enter a grief space. As we prepared to enter into that space, I could feel the anger welling up within me. I just knew that that's how my grief was going to be expressed, through anger. And during the ritual, when it came out, it really came out full blast. And it scared the daylights out of me to feel all of that. But a peculiar thing happened afterward. I was exhausted and trying to make sense of what had just happened. And I just was approached by man after man thanking me for my anger. I had one man say to me, "Your work was my work. Your healing was my healing. Thank you. I love you." And he pulled me in for a hug. I had no idea that anger could be connective, that grief could be connective. I've been engaged in grief work ever since then. I feel it as one of my callings. And as I've attended grief spaces and participated in those spaces, I've noticed how important it is for others to grieve openly, to give permission to those who are not ready yet to let it all out. That there's a modeling that occurs that is vital to the release of these energies. So when COVID hit, I knew that we would be facing massive sacred loss across the country and the globe. Not just loss of life, but other forms of sacred loss as well. Emotional stability, social connection, financial hardship. I wanted to create a space and open a space, and I did so, and I've been running this ritual since the end of March, daily. And I've learned two things about it that I'd like to share here. First thing I learned was that folks really seem to appreciate the space, even if they didn't engage in it themselves. I would say that for every person who has actually shown up to the ritual, I've received 5 messages from other folks telling me how important it is that this space be opened. This surprised me. I see our dominant culture as being grief phobic and grief fragile. What I mean by that is grief phobic, meaning we are afraid of grief, and grief fragile, meaning that when we do engage with grief, we cannot do so for very long. And when I look at those two characteristics, I just sort of assume that there's a devaluing of grief in our society since it's not engaged with publicly very often. But I don't think that's really true. I think there is a deep value placed on grief in our society. And I also think that We just don't know how to do it very well. The second thing that sort of surprised me was the community that developed around the ritual itself. I didn't know if anyone would even show up when I started, so I was ready to run the thing by myself, but a small community has formed around it, a handful of folks who are regulars. And I have to say that I feel a very deep connection with them, even though we are not exchanging in the way that I would normally think or the way I would normally act to create connection. I'm used to telling stories and jokes and laughing and smiling, and this is something different. We're connecting over our shared grief, and it bonds us very tightly. I have run the ritual a few times alone, and what surprised me was that when I run it alone, I rarely cry. I can't quite get to that space, but when I'm with others, I almost always cry. It pushes me to grieve. Days before George Floyd was murdered, there were reports that in a rush to reopen the country, certain state governments were withholding data around COVID. They were underreporting or not reporting infections or deaths. They needed different numbers that didn't look so bad so they could justify the reopening. And when I read these reports, I was so angry. So angry. I felt like they were taking away my capacity to grieve. It's hard to grieve what we do not know. It felt like the powers that be decided to just erase the experience, the pain, the loss, the journey of these people and their families. How dare they? After George Floyd was murdered, and we watched the country grieve collectively together, albeit indirectly through protests and songs of solidarity, I thought about how many times African American death, Native American death, the death of gays in the 80s at the start of the AIDS pandemic, migrant worker death, all of these losses that were almost erased by the powers that be. I thought about the indignity of denying the truth of one's death to their family, denying the public recognition as if it never happened. If George Floyd's murder was not recorded, it most surely would have been erased. And I thought about this congregation, my spiritual home and community. I thought of how many of you receiving this message now are in high-risk categories for COVID. It was not a leap anymore to say that if our congregation was located in Florida or Georgia, dominant culture, the state government would erase you. Smile. This threat of erasure arriving into the congregation brought home for me this one aspect of the inhumanity of dominant culture toward everyone else. I could chalk up this previous lack of understanding to racial ignorance or insensitivity, of which I admit I have plenty. But I think it is more that I understood nothing of grief. The spiritual wound of being denied grief struck me in the heart. I will never claim to understand the grief that comes under the pressures and conditions of being a racial minority in this country, subjected to erasure. But I know something of grief generally, how necessary it is for many, including myself, to have our public culture acknowledge the loss and give space to connect with one another over our shared grief. I felt increased spiritual kinship and a call to arms to fight back against any that would seek to thwart this right. Everyone has the right to grieve. In these times where everything feels divided and divisive, I move back to basic human emotions that we all carry. This is where we can connect. So many of us are hurting. If we share that honestly and safely, we will bond. So many of us are angry. If we share that honestly and safely, we will bond. So many of us are grieving. If we share that safely and honestly, we will bond. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, there is an increased call in UU to be more diverse. To this end, folks are marching and reading and doing their own work toward understanding the dominant culture water many of us swim in. I encourage all of that. It is necessary. But I do not think it is enough. If we want to connect with communities that live a different experience of our culture, I suggest that we connect over our shared humanity. Our white communities cannot fully understand the grief of our marginalized siblings, but we can understand our own grief. I invite us all to go into those difficult places in our own humanity, as I did when I went through my anger and grief to find connection on the other end. It is imperative that we understand our own grief so that we may inch closer to understanding the grief of the marginalized. When we cannot connect over our differences, we should connect over our commonalities. Here, our humanity. The more each of us is in touch with our own humanity, our frailty, our vulnerability, our absolute interconnectedness, the closer we get to understanding, the closer we get to changing this system together. You don't need a PhD in race relations to understand, Mama, I can't breathe. You only need to be in touch with your humanity. If we want to talk with those who are different from us, we must begin there, in our shared humanity. So I call on each of you to bravely get in touch with your grief and share that gift. Share it in your families. Share it here in our congregation. Share it with the outside communities. Grief is part of complete humanity and a connective part at that. If you open spaces for communal grief, the act of creating the space alone benefits others. We are all dealing with tremendous loss. Yes. Yes. But we are also dealing with tremendous loss together. our strengthened connection through that loss, that is the gift. Our closing words are number 468 in the hymnal, "We Need One Another." It's a responsive reading. I will read all the text, and I invite you at home to read along the italicized text. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. We need one another in the hour of success, when we look for someone to share our triumphs. We need one another in the hour of defeat, when with encouragement we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die, and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us.
Thank you.